get up. And on the way up, we're going to bite a kneecap off, all right? And we're going to stand up, and then it's going to take 2 more shots to knock us down, all right? And on the way up, we're going to take your other kneecap, and we're going to get up, and then it's going to take 3 shots to get us down.
What's up, all you Kneecaps Nation? Phil and I are back for another episode of Kneecaps for Breakfast. Vince Progar, that's me. Happy to be joined, as always, by Phil Byrne. And Phil, step outside, my friend. Summer is officially upon us.
Officially upon us. We are now past Father's Day when we're recording and you are listening to this. Obviously, next year, Vince, this day is going to be a little different from you. You know,
yeah, no kidding.
Yeah, you know, you can count Perry, your pup as your child if you want, but
sure.
You know, be that there will be a little Progar hanging around. You know, it'll make it a little bit different, but you know, we'll call a spade what it is, folks. You know, you're listening to a podcast. We go 52 weeks out of the year. I'll be honest, I think the next 3 to 4 weeks probably going to be some of the slowest for news unless news breaks. So we have sometimes recorded some of these in the summer that we thought there wasn't a ton of news popping, and then all of a sudden Frank Ragnow retires, things like that. So
yeah, for sure.
You know, we'll see, but we're definitely in the summertime now.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And we do appreciate the flexibility for those loyal listeners to Kneecaps for Breakfast out there, and we really do appreciate that. That due to some travel stuff going on with me over the weekend, I was out in Omaha, Nebraska, visiting some family over the weekend. So we just did a real quick, essentially a 2-day there and back type of thing, and we spent, I would say, a good hour on the tarmac, which is about as long as we were actually up in the air coming from Omaha to where we get off in Detroit. And I would say probably about 20 minutes into the actual flight itself, I experienced probably the worst amount of turbulence I've ever felt on an airplane before. And granted, it's not a huge sample size because I'm not a jet setter like a lot of people out there, but I didn't know if we were riding a roller coaster or a airplane or something else. It was kind of dicey there for about 60 seconds, but hey, we made it back in one piece, just a little bit too late to cut a episode. So Phil and I decided, hey, let's bumper back a day, and hey, life goes on, and the sun still rose in the east this morning, so I think everything is quite okay. But as we said, Phil, it is going to be kind of dry as far as anything new coming out of Allen Park from what we can forecast. And again, you called out, there is stuff that pops up out of nowhere, and there's stuff that still could. We don't know what's going to arise between now and the time the toe touches the football at the Hall of Fame game on January 31st. And of course, Phil and I will be here to break that all down, probably 6 days after the news breaks, but nonetheless, we'll be here to discuss it and break it all down as it happens. But Phil, what happens though is we have all of these big stories over the course of an offseason. We talk about free agency, we talk about trades, we talk about the draft, we talk about training camp when it happens. But what kind of gets lost in the shuffle a little bit is some of the business stuff that goes on amongst the organization, particularly the people that are behind the scenes in the organization. And you might be tuning into a game this coming fall, and you may be looking for some familiar faces on the sidelines, and you may not see those people. I mean, we've talked about Ben Johnson all offseason long. He's no longer part of the organization. He's off with the Chicago Bears. Same thing goes for Aaron Glenn. He's no longer the Lions defensive coordinator. He's now the head coach of the New York Jets. So the Lions are one of, I think they're the only team in the NFL who lost both of their O&D coordinators to head coaching jobs the very next season. So it happens at times. It happened to the Eagles a couple of years ago, and it was some rough waters for them initially before they finally settled back in this past season, and obviously took it all the way to the Super Bowl and are going to be getting some bling handed out to each of the players come the first week of September. So Phil and I thought it would be a good time to sort of reset the deck a little bit and get into what the Lions coaching staff is going to look like for the upcoming season. So no changes to the head man in charge, Dan Campbell, will be entering his fourth season as the, is that right? Fourth season?
Yeah, fourth
Yep.
season.
Yeah. Time flies, man. It's crazy. It
Man,
just seems like yesterday we were breaking down the initial press conference, and now he's going into his fourth season already. Time sure does fly. But aside from his right hand man at special teams, Phip, everybody else is pretty much changed. So, Phil, we're looking at John Morton, not the Johnny Morton, the receiver. John Morton, old white guy, going to be taking
from
over.
Auburn Hills and Western Michigan, local
Yeah,
guy.
yeah. How about that?
So,
Taking over the reins as offensive coordinator. What are we getting out of this guy, Phil? You think this is the right move, at least initially, before we've even lined up for a football game yet? Or do you think maybe there was a different move that could have been made that made more sense?
well, it's really interesting because I think we experienced a little bit of Dan Campbell play calling um, late in his first year when they made the move to get rid of Anthony Lynn in that spot before Ben Johnson formally took it over. And I don't think it was a situation where Campbell was particularly comfortable kind of having that sort of responsibility on him. He has never really, at least from what we've seen, been the primary play caller. So,
Which in today's NFL is growing increasingly rare.
yeah, yeah. So, you know, I think it's interesting. I know Hank Fraley, who um, is maybe the most underrated coach that the Lions have had in the Dan Campbell tenure, overseeing the offensive line. He took a cup of coffee out for a visit to potentially look at joining the Seattle Seahawks, I want to say,
Mm-hmm.
as their offensive coordinator. He turned it down. He basically got a little bit of a promotion in title. I'm expecting, or from what's being reported, a pay raise as well. That was initially a little bit of a shock because when I heard that, I think that was right before the Lions finalized anything. I thought, okay, well, maybe that is what they do. Maybe they elevate Mark Brunell into, calling some plays, and the Lions just kind of keep things moving on. John Morton, I think, is a little bit of a mystery here. He was with this team for, I think, Campbell's first year and kind of really did help settle Ben Johnson into the role a little bit. Did not have great success, really no detriment of his own, basically using the talent that he was given when he was in New York. And he is familiar with Sean Payton, which is obviously a plus for Dan Campbell. So I don't really know what to expect there. I just know that between Mark Brunell, maybe even Antoine Randall, who joined Ben Johnson in Chicago, Hank Fraley, or Tanner Engstrom, who eventually went to the New York Jets, there were a couple of different options that they milled through. So I think Dan Campbell likes having familiarity with what he's got going on in Allen Park. I think you look at a lot of the moves that the Lions made, whether it's promotions, whether it was like that. I don't think he wants to upset what that locker room is like right now under his direction. So, they made the move to go to John Morton. He's got some good college experience too, going back to his days at USC. So I think he's been around the block enough. I don't know. I think we kind of knew what we had with Ben Johnson, and it was almost like some games the Lions were up big. It was like Ben Johnson is doing this, and not Dan Campbell or the Lions offensive players. So it's really weird sometimes where credit gets assigned and who gets, to reap the rewards of it. But, John Morton's our offensive coordinator here. So I feel like we're not going to really know how he's going to call until we get into the regular season. So, at least we'll get a little bit of a sample size in the preseason. But I guess to me, to kind of answer your original question here, I guess it was a little surprising, but I think knowing what we know about Dan Campbell and that he didn't want to be the play caller, and for whatever reason didn't think Mark Brunell maybe either wanted that responsibility or was ready for it, they decided to bring John Morton in it. So we'll see.
And it is an interesting dynamic because, as you pointed out, Phil, there is the mutual connection to Sean Payton there. So,
Yeah.
obviously, a very adept offensive mind, Sean Payton is. So, you're really pulling from a lot of the same principles that Dan Campbell is comfortable with.
Yeah.
The question is how much does he look to upset the apple cart from what they did under Ben Johnson? Because of the proximity to Ben Johnson with the Chicago Bears, you're going to be going up against the guy twice a year. You really can't sit here and say, oh, nothing's going to change right down to the terminology. You're going to have to redo a lot of that stuff. Otherwise, Ben Johnson and his team are going to know exactly what you're doing. So there has to be at least a heavy level of disguising of a lot of your own concepts there, because a lot of that stuff would have come out of Ben Johnson's playbook. So there has to be, in my mind, some ingenuity and change and differential to what John Morton brings you. The question then becomes to what extent, because they already had a good thing going. They have, when healthy, one of the most electric and prolific offenses in the entire NFL. So it doesn't do anybody any good to make change for change's sake. However, like I said, there has to be some level of variation just so the Bears don't know exactly what you're going to be throwing at them twice a year. There also is the situation with Jared Goff. There is some familiarity with John Morton and Jared Goff going back to the first year when Ben Johnson was a lower level assistant at the time. Dan Campbell was the de facto play caller after Anthony Lynn had been relieved of his duties. There is some speculation that Ben Johnson may have been kind of a man behind the curtain in that second half of that season, kind of spoon feeding Dan Campbell what to say, and Campbell pretty much just put it out over the headset. I don't know. I can't prove it, but sources have kind of hinted that's kind of how it was.
Yeah.
But Goff had also gone out of his way to kind of stick up for John Morton during the whole vetting process for offensive coordinator. So it sounds like the connection that the two of them made that first year in Detroit was beneficial to Goff, to where he thinks that he can get something out of this relationship and be able to parlay it into a successful on-field 2025 performance.
Yeah, and I think that's really the key piece of it. I think they clearly have a good dynamic rolling with Goff and Mark Brunell. But to have John Morton kind of be in a role above Brunell and get full command of the offense, I think is going to allow him to have a good relationship with Goff, going back to what was already established, but also keeping him in check, right? I think a lot of Lions fans, when we look at this team, there's two big pain points that we're seeing. And, one of them is, of course, that other defensive end, right? Not to beat a dead horse, but we're beating a dead horse. And the other is just like, have we plateaued with Jared Goff? Or can he find the way to not have, just absolute worst case scenario throws where it's a pick six, where it's a fumble, where it's a bad snap? Because we know we can win the playoffs. We've gotten there with him. But so many times in the playoffs, you just don't know what kind of quarterback you're getting with him. So that's the big question mark that I want to see within the offensive coaches that are still on staff here.
Yeah, so as we continue to kind of analyze that a little bit, maybe a solution to that concern, Phil, could be in the newly appointed passing game coordinator position. And that one went to former longtime Stanford head coach David Shaw, who was a sexy pick to be an NFL head coach for a lot of years. And I don't know if he just wasn't really interested at the end of the day, or if, just again, minority status, maybe just wasn't getting a fair crack at it the way he maybe should have. But in any case, he never got that head coaching gig. After a couple years out of football and doing the TV analyst thing, he is now a member of the Lions coaching staff as the passing game coordinator. And he, over the course of his tenure with Stanford, ran that very old school, very pro style system. Jared Goff is about as pro style of a quarterback as what you can possibly ask for. And I think what a pillar of David Shaw's system at Stanford was consistency and don't make mistakes. Whatever you do, just go out there and play football. Just don't go out there and be
Yeah.
gunning it all over the yard and throwing it to the wrong color jersey and putting the ball on the rug. So maybe you bring in a guy who's a disciplinarian with your mind, like David Shaw is, and maybe something like that is what it takes to resonate with Goff to, hey, in the worst possible moment, don't totally lose your mind out there. You know,
I
maybe
like
something,
it.
maybe something like that's the solution. And then around him,
Yeah.
they really didn't disrupt a whole lot because you still have Mark Brunell as his quarterback's coach. So there's going to be that familiarity there. You still have Scotty Montgomery as the assistant head coach and the wide receivers coach. So there's some continuity that's in place there. Hank Fraley, you already pointed out, is probably going to be the highest paid offensive line coach in football. So there is a lot of consistency on this offensive side of the ball, which is good because we have fewer question marks on the offensive side of the ball going into the season. So it helps that they don't have as much turnover on the offensive staff once you get past John Morton.
And one guy I do like who they have brought in on that offensive coaching staff, name we haven't seen in the pro ranks quite yet, Tashard Choice, who will be the
former
Lions
Cowboys backup running back, right?
Yeah, back when they had like Julius Jones, Tashard Choice, God, who else? Played with Tony Romo, I'm assuming. I think I'm getting my ears right here. So he has prior experience with Jahmyr Gibbs. He is a Georgia Tech product, and I want to say was the running back coach at Georgia Tech, where Jahmyr Gibbs initially started out.
He recruited him out of high school.
Yeah. So that's really exciting for me, knowing his eye for talent. Jahmyr Gibbs could have gone to a lot of different places. And I remember watching the St. Brown Brothers podcast, and they were like, Georgia Tech? Really? And Jahmyr Gibbs, before he even, had Tashard Choice as running back coach, was hyping up Tashard Choice as one of the main reasons he got him there. So that should probably be a pretty good dynamic to watch. We obviously expect the world out of Jahmyr Gibbs now with, where his production has been. So, we'll see how the offensive line holds up, not having Ragnow in there, but obviously expecting big things from Sodic.
It almost makes you wonder, though, if there's still another gear with Jahmyr Gibbs, because you never really know, because he's always one to continue to amaze every time he steps on the football field.
Yeah.
You got to think there's still more left in the tank for a kid as young as he is, that there's still a heck of a lot more to give if the right guy like a Tashard Choice as his running backs coach can be able to unlock something still.
Well, and I feel like he probably has more to, I think we've seen just about every kind of run from him that he would have in his arsenal, whether, he's running to the other side of the field to get something open. He's done the power stuff. He's taken ones to the house from way back when, just, destroying defenses with his all-out speed. But I would say it would probably be in the receiving game. I love David Montgomery, don't get me wrong, but I think we're going to start to see Jahmyr Gibbs really have the bulk of the carries here moving forward. And if he's in there more, are we going to see an opportunity where he's going to get out in the open? Because all of a sudden, when you have both Jahmyr Gibbs and Jameson Williams as receiving threats out there, I cannot think of a team that has the defensive speed that will be able to keep up with both those guys if they're on the same side of the field.
Bringing this conversation about the offensive coaching staff full circle here, that's going to then depend, however, on what John Morton wants to do from a philosophical standpoint. Does he want to be a run-heavy offense? Does he want to be more of a pass-heavy offense like Ben Johnson kind of evolved into at times? We don't know, and nobody has really dropped any hints of that just yet. So it's going to be kind of interesting to kind of do our best to be a fly on the wall. We don't get a whole lot of insider access once training camp gets going. Phil, maybe I'll have to send you as a Kneecaps for Breakfast incel down to training camp on season ticket holder night or something like that and see if you can pick up any type of hint that indicates what kind of offense this team's going to be because I don't really have any idea.
Well, I'm definitely looking to get down there because, yeah, got a lot of stuff going on. But looking forward to seeing what the team looks like here.
Absolutely. So let's head on over to the defensive staff. So, unlike the John Morton situation where he was brought in from the outside, the Lions also had a little bit of a decision to make. Do they go to the outside or do they promote from within? And they decided to choose choice B for this one by promoting longtime linebackers coach Kelvin Shepard, who's been around
Yeah.
from the beginning of the Dan Campbell regime. They promoted him to be defensive coordinator. So you at least have a little bit of continuity as far as not as much in the way of terminology changing necessarily, but they brought in a lot more fresh and new faces around him to a unit that is still a little bit volatile, trying to figure out how we're going to plug holes for guys that just aren't here and we need to replace that production. And also guys like Aleem McNeil, for instance, that are going to start the season hurt. And we're going to have to figure out how we get things started.
Yeah, without a doubt, and that's really going to be pretty important with this coaching staff.
What do you think as far as Kelvin Shepard goes? You think this is going to be a successful 2025 for him based on the experience that he's garnered as an assistant under Aaron Glenn these last few years?
Well, I mean, I think that's the biggest component of all this is what Aaron Glenn was able to piece together and what he was able to get that unit to perform. Everyone knew Ben Johnson during the season was that hot candidate, right? He had opportunities that he turned down. But I think the way that Aaron Glenn and just we as Lions fans viewed our defense and the defensive plays and we're like, this isn't good enough. Make no mistake about it. There were people a year and a half ago that thought Aaron Glenn was not fit to be the defensive coordinator of this team. And they sound absolutely foolish now because he is the head coach of the New York Jets. So, it's one of those things that I think Kelvin Shepard was probably his right-hand man. I think maybe if your offense is going to change up a little bit from philosophy standpoint, maybe your defense won't as much. Again, a lot of I think on defense is going to be the dependency on Aiden Hutchinson, whether or not we're going to get some more play out of some of the guys on defense. What we'll have to see. Obviously we like where our safeties are at, things like that. But I don't know. Defense is going to be interesting. It is. I hope it's not a drop off, but we will see if it was a case of a young nucleus kind of stepping up on defense and helping support Aaron Glenn, or if Aaron Glenn just ran a masterclass on, how to duct tape a defense, get it to work, get it to outperform what it was good, supposed to be. And, that's why he's a head coach now.
Now, the only thing that concerns me is, okay, you've got the question marks of what Kelvin Shepard is going to be as a coordinator, of course. And you can have all these ideas and philosophies in mind till you're black and blue in the face. The issue then becomes he's not the one shopping for the groceries. That's Brad Holmes. So if Kelvin Shepard is sitting out his window looking out at the stars, dreaming for a edge rusher to complement Aiden Hutchinson to fall into his lap, that ain't going to happen. So it's almost like he may be forced to change what he wants to do just based on personnel decisions that he may or may not have the ability to have much say-so in right this minute, or at least until he gets maybe a little bit more established.
Yeah, and some of that is going to be I don't know who the defensive line coach is at the moment here. I'm trying to find that. I think it might be Casey Rogers, I think. If I'm seeing that right.
Defensive line coach Casey Rogers. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so it'll be Casey Rogers. So, I know he's one that has quite a bit of experience. He's kind of gotten the most of some of the units that he's been in charge with. It's a couple different things here, right? Because, again, we've talked about it. Marcus Davenport, we don't know what we have from him from an injury standpoint, if he's going to be able to play. Zadarius Smith, I think most Lions fans are kind of the mindset that We're going to find a way to make that work. But if those two don't come to be, and you are still kind of playing in, basically we're rolling back a lot of the guys that we had as rotational pieces in the second half of the year. The the Mohammeds, guys like that. That it's going to really rely upon, can Casey Rogers get, our young defensive end that we just drafted out of Boise on the field and actually playing where he wouldn't be a liability, because we're going to have to develop someone if it's not going to be an outside acquisition, because again, we're talking through this till we're blue in the teeth. It is still very scary and very much a concern if we want to be among a Super Bowl elite level, which I think most Lions fans believe that we still are, but we'll have to see.
And unfortunately, there is a strong contingent both within the fan base and within the Lions clubhouse and within the front office that believes that all the ingredients to win a Super Bowl existed right under, I can't remember what the Lions official address is down there at Allen Park. Something Republic Drive in Allen Park. What's their what's there, a 200 Republic Drive or something like that? I can't remember.
Something like that.
Let's just roll it out. 200 Republic Drive in Allen Park. They believe that whoever was in that building was good enough to win a Super Bowl, but injuries and a slew of bad luck basically stopped that from happening. So we're going to find out real quick, assuming that things regress, or I should say in this case, progress towards the mean a little bit, that as bad of luck as they had last year in the injury department, maybe that they get a little bit of a bounce back this year towards the mean a little bit. And who knows, maybe we're proven wrong a little bit. It just sure as heck seems like there is more that could still be done, and that just hasn't come to pass yet. And for a first-time coordinator to be put in that type of situation where he's playing a lot of depth pieces in some high leverage situations, it sure seems like a lot to ask. But that's the Lions coaching staff in a nutshell, and we'll kind of do one more little reminder of that right before we kick off. But we didn't spend a whole lot of time on that this past offseason, so it kind of seemed like a good time to go a little bit more in depth on that than we normally would over the course of the offseason and obviously the regular season, when we're basically only breaking down what Campbell does and what the coordinators do, and that's about it. Another thing that makes a little bit of sense in this same light, Phil, is, like we said, we're talking about shopping for the groceries, whether it be through the draft or through free agency or pickups off the street or whatever the case may be. And we spent some time over the last couple of months talking about the new Lions, the draft picks and whatnot. Sounds to me that everybody has signed their rookie deal so far, with the exception of possibly, with the news of Frank Ragnow retiring a couple weeks ago, possibly the most important guy out of the rookie class, Tate Ratledge, who looks to be getting quite a bit of time, possibly at center later in the year, definitely at one of the guards to start the season, is the one guy to have not signed his rookie contract as of Father's Day weekend. Is this something that concerns you in any way, Phil?
Well, it concerns me just in the fact that we know we're going to have to rely upon him. We know he's going to have to play early. And is it a case of we got him in the second round, he was expecting first round money? These rookie negotiations are just very sometimes confusing. You look at what the Cincinnati Bengals are going through, where they can't sign the kid out of Texas A&M, Shamar Stewart,
who was actually, oddly enough, Phil, the guy that you called out when we were doing our draft preview, was a guy that would make a lot of sense coming here.
Hey, you know what? I'd be up for it.
Come on over.
Can we get the draft rights? Maybe trade him a third round pick or something.
Yeah, right.
But anyways, that's a pipe dream. We're not playing Madden here.
No.
But you get the idea that, like, usually there's something that is getting reported as why a deal isn't working. Usually it's like draft slot. Some guy fell quite a bit. ironically enough, I haven't heard anything about Shador Sanders having a contract situation with the Browns or anything. So even though he fell like where he did, it sounds like that's been going along pretty well. But hey, it's one of those things that you don't want this to be a situation where he's missing time in training camp as a rookie. He needs to be there. OTAs are one thing. Again, you're really not in pads for any of this. It's
No.
it's it's shorts and a helmet, if anything else. So we need him in training camp though, and the more time that he can officially spend in Allen Park, the better when it comes to playbook install because by all accounts, it looks like he will be starting in one way or another for this team.
And if you are in Camp Ratledge, you're almost kind of patting yourself on the back that you didn't rush to the table to sign the deal originally because
Yeah,
you brought up maybe second rounder expecting first round money at first. You could look at it from a different angle in that knowing now the leverage goes over to Ratledge now, knowing that more is going to be asked of him than previously anticipated. He's a second round pick. He's probably going to be your starting center at some point before the season's over. So all of a sudden, you're expecting a heck of a lot more out of the second round draft pick. Maybe
yeah.
they're going to use that tidbit for a little bit of leverage. I'm not sure, but you don't hear quite as much about rookies not getting their deal signed in a timely manner because you used to see it all the time. If you were a top 5 draft pick in the NFL, it was pretty much a done deal that 3 out of those 5 at least were going to be missing some time at training camp because they were in a complete stalemate. You just don't see that anymore. So when you get a situation like this, which has really been behind closed doors, there's really been nothing publicized about it. The Shamar Stewart issue that you brought up with Cincinnati has been a lot more out in the open and not so much hostile necessarily, but it's still something that's of concern. You just hope it doesn't get to that point with the Lions. It's out of character for them to get to that point, but it's still not something you want to get going
No,
with training camp in about a month's time with.
yeah, absolutely. We got to wrap it up at some point.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Speaking of wrap up, Phil, we will wrap things up by taking one last look at some of the younger guys that, again, we spent a lot of time last year talking about,
Yeah,
and we've kind of replaced that conversation with the rookie class for this year. But there's going to have to be a lot of guys that step up and really show there's a reason why they were drafted in some cases as higher draft picks, first round, second round, third round, what have you. So we've seen some contributions from a lot of these rookies a season ago. We saw Terrion Arnold basically getting thrown to the wolves at corner for his first season on the job. We saw Christian Mahogany get a couple of games worth of reps down the stretch to at least see that this guy knows how to play
yeah.
football. So there are some things that we do know. But beyond that, Phil, when you look at just the second years, the sophomores in this Lions organization, who do you think is most poised to be somebody that we need to be on the lookout for as far as somebody that's going to be a big playmaker or effective ball player for us coming up this fall?
Well, I think there's two different ways you want to look at it. The first is that with the capital that we used on it and going back-to-back picks, I think Ennis Rakestraw, getting him on the field, getting him in reps, and if he's not going to be a starter, at least have him in packages where he's going to be on the field is paramount. Um, Unfortunately, in today's NFL, with the way that the contracts are headed, is that if you really can't crack the two deep and start making contributions by halfway through your second season, towards the end of your second season, um, writing's pretty much on the wall that your team's not going to be bringing you back, and then you're just going to be, what, a special teams player, at best, the rest of your career. So for Lions fans, and I think for this defense as a whole, I think we need to see Ennis Rakestraw. I wouldn't say like turn a corner. I wouldn't even say like break out, but just contribute. And I'm not saying special teams. I'm saying, can we get him into, some
Cover
meaningful
somebody.
snaps? Yeah, exactly. So that's the one thing that I want to see when we're actually talking about games that matter. The other piece of this is in the preseason. I think that Canton game right off the bat, an awesome opportunity for Giovanni Manu. Again, this guy was drafted in the 4th round. We could have had guys that now where we look at where the offensive line is at, where we look at the defensive line is at. What does his future look like in this team? You know, it's basically like you would get an update on him every 4 to 5 months, radio silent. Some people think the jump from the level of college football that he played in Canada to the NFL was too big. You know, he's a great looking athlete, super tall, super physical, but you know, is he cut out for it? You know, that's what this preseason is going to be. So those are going to be the two that I'm primarily focused on.
And here's the thing, Phil. We know that Dan Campbell prefers not to play a lot of the heavy hitters, a lot of the stars, a lot of the active players that we all know and rattle off the tip of our tongue in the preseason. I think that we need to take the fact that the Lions have been given a 4th preseason game and turn that into a positive, turn that into an opportunity to get some of these guys, especially like Amanu, who we just need to get him out on that field. It doesn't matter if we go 0-4 in those preseason games, because the guys who are going to be out there on that 53-man roster contributing in the regular season aren't going to be playing anyway. So the chances of them going 4-0 and beating up on people just isn't a realistic thing to expect. So if we can get a guy like Manu or a guy like Rakestraw, who we need to see what this guy can do and get them out there for 4 games to at least just see what you can do. We know that you're not going up against 1s and 2s. That's okay. You just need to be out there on that football field, getting reps, proving that you're durable enough to stay healthy over the course of these 2 games. Use this opportunity, and then all of a sudden, maybe as roster cutdowns come around, we'll see if you're a guy that's worth keeping around or not. All right, that is it for this episode of Kneecaps for Breakfast. We appreciate you bearing with us a day late, but Phil and I will be right back here on schedule next week as we dive into more off-season action here on Kneecaps for Breakfast. For Phil Byrne across the way, Vince Progar saying good morning, go Lions, forward down the field, over and out.